Alive and Well STL is a presentation of the St. Louis Regional Health Commission and Rare Gem Productions to build a healthier St. Louis. The Regional Health Commission works in partnership with regional health sector advocates and stakeholders to improve healthcare access, reduce health disparities, and improve health outcomes for the uninsured and the underinsured in St. Louis City and County.
Alive and Well STL. Police officers, EMTs, and firefighters witness and endure more than their fair share of trauma. They are exposed to potentially traumatic events as a part of their daily careers.
We compartmentalize. We compartmentalize on the job in order to do our job when we're on the scene. When you compartmentalize, you have to put away your feelings about what you're seeing. It could be a very horrific scene. It could be a very aggravating or frustrating scene. It doesn't matter. You have to be able to kind of put your emotions to the side and compartmentalize it and, what you're feeling about this particular event and put those aside and do your job.
Police, firefighters, EMTs, military, doctors, nurses, correctional officers, dispatchers, clergy, and mental health professionals. And in many cases, you are the first responder. Today on Alive and Well STL, we talk about when helping hurts and the emotional residue of the exposure from helping people through trauma, responding to traumatic incidences, as well as just being witnesses to it. A very special focus on vicarious trauma on this Alive and Well STL. This is producer Jade Harrell. We'll be right back.
The community is crying out for help, and there are individuals that live in the community that want to be involved. It's so dynamic, and the stigma is that people are just accepting what's going on, that they've become callous to the violence every day, but it's not true. It's just that people are looking for some leadership and something to get involved in that's sincere and that's everlasting and not just a quick fix. And what we're trying to do is come up with an idea and approaches that are everlasting, long-lasting approach and not a quick fix, and something that's sustainable for the community.
If as a community we can understand that most of all the issues that we face in our lives are directly related to toxic stress and trauma, we can create a place where people understand that there are reasons behind behaviors. These aren't just random acts of violence, and things aren't just happening out of the blue. There are reasons behind all of that. It's time to thrive. Be alive and well. Check out aliveandwellstl.com. Alive and Well STL. Meet the first responders, who are the people that are designated and trained to respond to an emergency. What is often overlooked is that they are people nonetheless, and they also need self-care and resources and tools to be alive and well. All right, it's time to expand our conversation of Alive and Well to the trauma that occurs for those that respond to toxic situations or traumatic incidences. First responders' vicarious trauma is the focus of our new conversation, and I'm joined today by Sergeant Sally Panzer, who is the Crisis Intervention Team and Officer Wellness Program Coordinator, as well as Hostage Negotiation Coordinator, and April Casey, who is with the Giving Resources Among Children Everywhere organization, Vice President. April is an ambassador as well for Alive and Well STL. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, let's start by explaining this realm of focus. And what does vicarious trauma mean for you, Sergeant Panzer?
Well, there's a couple different types of trauma. You have your primary trauma, which is something that happens, like an event that happens to you personally. And then you have secondary trauma, which secondary trauma doesn't happen to you directly. It's indirect. So it's like something that I've witnessed or heard about, seen pictures of, something like that, that affects me over time.
And then if we put it in the realm of vicarious, then that would be the secondary?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And well, what that resonates for me when I hear this is that it's pretty intense. It's pretty heavy. It's something that would make an impact that is lasting. Would you say it falls into that category?
Oh, absolutely,
okay.
Yes.
Okay, well then take us into your world as you experience it, one for crisis intervention and maybe for those that experience it.
For crisis intervention, you can have somebody who is, let's say, off their medication, so they're non-medication compliant. Let's say, and this is just a thrown out story.
This is great, yeah.
Let's say they're psychotic due to a mental illness. Okay, and during that state, they can react to those hallucinations. They can react to their delusions. They can act upon them. And this is really their mental illness actually coming through. But they can do some also very horrific things when they're in that state. Now, obviously, this does not happen to everyone. I'm not trying to overgeneralize. This is just a very specific example.
Yeah, we're there.
And they can do some horrific things. There was a case, a true story, many, many years ago where this young man was, he's diagnosed schizophrenic, and he kept hearing voices and having hallucinations regarding his parents were evil. You need to kill them. You need to kill them. He ended up killing his parents.
Oh, dear.
It was a terrible, terrible scene for anyone to witness, even though he was psychotic.
There who witnessed?
No, but officers had to respond to the scene.
Exactly. So that's where their first responders piece comes in.
Exactly. Right? So when we respond to scenes like that, or let's say a crash on the highway, or a fatality, or a homicide scene, or child abuse scene for that. I mean, you can.
I mean, it's all of it.
It's all of it
because you're who we call
exactly,
and who is called when these things arise.
So we see so much of this day in, day out, and it becomes lasting. It becomes a part of, not of who you are, but it becomes a part of your memory.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There are times when you hear of or become aware of the sensitivity to it wanes or is lessened. Or you hear someone say, well, after a while you just become numb. What we're learning with Alive and Well STL is that you're not necessarily numb. You may have put the immediate feeling aside from it, but it doesn't go away. Can you talk about that a little bit? Yeah,
after a while, we compartmentalize. We compartmentalize on the job in order to do our job when we're on the scene.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can do it.
Break that down. So,
when you compartmentalize, you have to put away your feelings about what you're seeing. It could be a very horrific scene. It could be a very aggravating or frustrating scene. It doesn't matter. You have to be able to kind of put your emotions to the side and compartmentalize it, and what you're feeling about this particular event, and put those aside and do your job. Mm-hmm. And so we do that. You do that on fatal accidents, that et cetera. Every scene you go to.
Right.
So when you have that emotional numbing, as you stated, that happens. I mean, it can happen anytime. I mean, a lot of times when emotional numbing comes into effect is you keep compartmentalizing. You're not addressing like how you feel regarding some of this, and some of it, and then it boils down to you have stress, and then you have trauma, mm-hmm. and it becomes a part of the trauma burnout series. So it's kind of like a continuum.
Sure.
So stress, burnout, mm-hmm. trauma. And so emotional numbing is kind of part of the burnout phase on all that, because you start to shut down. You think you're shutting down one emotion.
Right.
Okay. Like your sadness.
Yeah.
Okay. Your sadness or anger. Well, you can't shut down just one emotion. Mm-hmm. If you shut down one, you shut down everything. So therein lies the big difference. So emotional, it's not that they're not feeling. Mm-hmm. It's just we don't always want to feel all that, because, that's a lot of stuff to feel.
It is. And then, and you mentioned over time and it being compounded, then you put in that compartment, and, out of sight, out of mind kind of thing, where I'm just not addressing them at all. You brought up the addressing it part and how necessary it is. So how on earth do you all manage with the constant onslaught of that and maintaining the life and joy that you're entitled to live,
I think everyone has their own individual ways of coping, mm-hmm. okay, and their own coping mechanisms for all this. For me personally, and I can't speak for anyone else, but like for me, I like to read. It's kind of like a good escape period for me. Or I go work out at the gym, and some workouts after a really hard day, I'll tell you, I put it all sometimes into my workout, and I need to do that for me.
I get that.
You know what? I just go and I play with my dog, and I, hold my dog, or we have a very serious conversation, and he listens attentively, and,
They're great for that, aren't they?
And he's great for that. And, so every one of us has our own way of kind of doing different things like that.
Right.
And, on the healthy side, we all try to keep, I'm sure, as healthy coping mechanisms as we can. And I'm sure that, I might have a couple of not so good ones. I'm human, it happens, So, but, for the most part, I think we all try to keep them on the positive light of things.
Absolutely. And then, in a way, prepares you or equips you for what you may not know is next.
Exactly.
So rather than when you get on the scene, you're kind of preparing yourselves to address whatever scene is next in line.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Things don't stop. So, April, then, wow. So you've been through the ambassador training. As you hear Sergeant Panzer speak, what kinds of things were you made aware of through your training that would be helpful for us to know, but also to offer our first responders?
Well, being a former first responder,
I heard you mention BDUs.
As Sergeant Panzer said, you learn how to cope with what you see because you can't undo what you see. So you have to figure out what's best for you. One of the things that Alive and Well has sort of brought a highlight to me, even though you consciously sort of know these things, as you say, you don't address them, you don't want to deal with it. Because if I open my eyes to say, okay, yes, this is happening, that means I have to do something about it.
Right.
And some of us are not quite prepared, ready to do that.
Well, it can be pretty heavy.
Yes, it can be very heavy. And it not only does it affect the way we do business and how we do our jobs, but it affects our home life because we begin to sort of isolate, shut down, sometimes become not the nice people that we used to be because unfortunately we become very cynicism sets in.
Sure.
So you have to learn, different self-care methods. As Sergeant Panzer said, she runs or goes to the gym. Talks to the dog. Right.
When you were a former first responder, what were your tools?
Well, one of the things that I always did, is I came from, a very communicative family. So my family's military as well. So I was quite sort of used to the things that sort of happen in that world. So we always talked. I felt safe and comfortable talking to my family when I saw something that was traumatic or sort of affected me later.
Okay.
Usually it's kids for me. Yeah. Kids they get me. Yeah. So I had that outlet as well as, my coworkers. We could, amongst, my group, we could talk and feel safe and not feel like we would be judged.
Yeah.
So, but not everybody has that, especially, if you, particularly our spouses or our girlfriends or boyfriends, if they're not used to that, we don't want to come home and burden them with it. So we sort of hold it in and, some talk about it and some don't. Some shut down, come home. I don't want to. Don't say anything to me. I need to be alone.
Right.
And it affects our relationships, not with just people in general. If you don't recognize it and you don't accept that it happens, it's okay.
Right.
But it's how you deal with it that makes all the difference in the world.
For sure. And dealing with it, as we know with Alive and Well, is that if we don't, it can make us sick. And when I think about. So you were a former first responder. What made you change focus or not do it anymore?
I was injured. And so after I came out of injury, I decided that I had a small child at the time and her father's also in law enforcement.
Oh, boy.
So we kind of decided maybe both of us shouldn't be out here. So I decided to take other routes. It was a lot easier for me to do it than him. So I'm appreciative that I did do that, though, because it's allowing me to be able to help in another way. I'm still, making sure, my Blue family is, to the best of our abilities, taken care of. Because, like any first responder, firefighters, EMTs, dispatchers, emergency room trauma nurses, doctors, all of the see things that affect you, whether you want to acknowledge it or not.
How did that work with you and your husband both being in law enforcement? Did you all work well with communicating about it, or how did that impact your
We did, because we would kind of come home and talk about our day.
Right.
So
how was your day?
How was your day?
Yeah.
And like I said, I felt comfortable because I did not feel like in my mind I was traumatizing him. And he did, and vice versa, by talking about what happened.
Sure.
Because he sees the same things. May not, we may have seen them in different ways or to different extents, but he could understand and, be on the same page of not saying, "Oh my gosh,"
right.
And
he would have that empathy.
Exactly. You could you would have that level of compassion.
Well, you know what, and I'm thinking you would know just what to say or do. In a sense,
sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't.
Well, sure, okay.
Well,
maybe not precisely,
right?
But by having, the whole thing with Alive and Well is that understanding for another person or trying to get an idea of what has happened for you. Like if you describe to me, and kids would be my thing. Just even thinking about it now, I'm thinking, we're good. You don't even have to tell me the story yet. I'm just knowing that there's something that happens, but. In knowing in great detail and by experience what he's saying, beyond a description, that certainly puts you at an advantage to be a help and support.
Right, because you can empathize and have compassion at the same time.
Well, what's your dog's name, Sally?
Bogey.
Bogey, like Bogey.
Right.
Bogey just the way.
Bogey may not have the answers, but
Bogey
can be comforting.
Say a word. Right. Exactly. Just look, I know I need to link.
They always know because they can feel your energy. So
they can feel your energy.
They can sense if you're down, or they can sense if you're not feeling well because you have a bad cold or what have you, So they can sense all that. So they kind of react based upon what kind of energy you're putting out. They can sense anger, all of that. So whatever energy you're putting out is exactly what you're going to kind of get back from them.
Yeah.
For the most part.
We could take a few notes out of their book, huh?
Sometimes. Absolutely.
Right.
They don't seem to sweat the small stuff.
Tell me a little bit, April, about your involvement as an ambassador. What avenue have you taken, and how do you implement your training?
Essentially, I've done is what I can to go to various organizations, community events, anyone who calls and asks, essentially, and says, hey, because whether you work as a teacher, whether almost at this point, no matter where you work, there's been some level of unfortunate trauma, whether it's been personal or professional. And people, as a community, thanks to Alive and Well as STL, and as well as, Department of Mental Health and Department of, Regional Mental Health Commission, of getting out there that, people are experiencing trauma in all forms and fashions, whether it's private trauma or public trauma. And it affects us all in different ways. Compound that with, mental illness. So when you have this rash, it almost appears, of feelings that are sort of not being, managed and contained, people react in various ways. Whether some it's positive, some are able to kind of internally turn it around and, put good energy out there and do good work. Others sometimes, whether it's their control or not, whether they're off their meds, or you have those who have never been diagnosed. They don't know what's going on with them. So they just know that this is their life. They don't understand it. They don't know why it's happening, and there's a multitude of reasons as to why they haven't sought some sort of medical intervention.
But you're happy to step up.
But we're happy, to step up and, kind of teach people what trauma is and how toxic stress affects us, not only physically, but mentally and physiologically.
Sure. Let's break that down a little bit then. What is toxic stress, and how would you explain that and how it affects us?
Toxic stress really is anything that impedes your quality of life. They can onset, we said, medical conditions like high blood pressure. You can have strokes. You can have
lots of children.
Right. You can have.
That's for me. I'm sorry.
It can have.
Especially in the summer.
And toxic stress can cause aneurysms. There's so many different things because your body is out of whack. It's out of balance, chemically as well as physically. You'll have people who will think, I'm dehydrated, and they very well may be, but it's also the tension in their body saying something's not right. So you sort of have to really figure out what's causing the stress. And for some people, unfortunately, it's the community in which they live.
Well, yeah. We don't have to sugarcoat that. We got Sergeant Panzer here.
Unfortunately for some,
I said, sir, when I see her, I said, so how's it going? She said, busy, and that there is a testament to how much of it goes on. Now, you're a part of this officer wellness program, and you coordinate that. And so your focus is with toxic stress as well. For the officers that you serve and help, spell out how you define toxic stress for them and how it affects them.
Well, there's toxic stress, and then there's 4 other layers. There's 2 layers before toxic stress. It's kind of a continuum.
Okay. Go ahead and teach.
And it's kind of a part of the dissociation process, because we kind of dissociate at some point, and not necessarily in a bad way or in a psychotic way. This is just kind of how we deal with things.
Like you said,
they named it dissociation.
Job. Sure.
So you can have your regular, ordinary kind of, you can call it zoning out. You're kind of just autopilot, if you will. That's kind of pretty much normal, like when you're driving to work.
Yeah.
When we're driving to work, we're on what? We're on autopilot.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just...
Or like you're supposed to be going to the store, and for some reason you're going to work. You say, why am I doing that?
Because you turn one way versus the other, and your body just takes over. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been such a routine. Sure.
Been there, done that.
Right.
And then you have the, I can't remember the name of the next level of stress, but there's another level, and that's just kind of like where you're going along in autopilot, and then you kind of have to hit your brakes right in the middle of it, because let's say someone up ahead of you hit their brakes, and so now you have the chain reaction. Everyone's hitting their brakes. So it's just a little speed bump, kind of thing. It's no big deal, really. It's just, a couple speed bumps here and there.
Sure.
So then you kind of have the toxic stress, which is now your coping mechanisms aren't quite maxed out yet, but they're getting there because we haven't been dealing with stuff.
Right.
So now you get the toxic. And then there's the 2 upper ones from that are where you really do need professional help for that. So if you're in those levels, you can have complete behavior, personality changes is the most extreme. You really just turn into not yourself. And anyone who knows you knows, like, you are just not who you are. And that's when you really do need professional help.
Right.
Seek a counselor or somebody who's trained in trauma for that, because not everyone is trained for trauma. Right. So, you want someone who's experienced and understands trauma-informed care.
So if you're working with the, and is this full wellness, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional health that you are working with when it comes to this, or does it deal a lot with the stress that you were referring to, the various levels therein with your function?
Well, it kind of depends, really. Okay. I mean, I've
like, how do they end up coming to you? How do you become aware of and then respond to the needs of the officers?
So what I'm doing right now is I've written an officer wellness program that's fairly comprehensive and sent that up my chain of command for approval. It has quite a few different components in there to help address very specific things within the department, as far as crisis incident management, for instance, in crisis debrief after really bad things, horrific things officers have seen or continually see. So just different aspects like that. I've also compiled a officer resource list and have emailed that out of people throughout the St. Louis area, and very specifically, because I've done some research on all of them, and just to make sure that everything is what I'm looking for, et cetera. And we have our own EAP, of course, which officers are welcome to use. But I wanted to give them more resources if they didn't feel comfortable using the EAP.
Sure.
So I've given it's like a 3-page list now, and some very specific also for veterans, because we have a lot of military veterans on our department as well. And although the needs could be the same, they being a military veteran, they might feel more comfortable speaking with someone with a military background.
Sure.
So I've provided both.
Yeah,
I've created both. And then I'm just filling in as I find more resources.
Right.
I republish it and highlight it. And the more resources someone has to reach out, they're more likely to reach out if they need it.
Okay, in your experience. And, the more situations and needs you find, you then can add in your discovery of more resources or ways to support and address.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
I get a lot of feedback from some officers, and their feedback is very helpful to me. So I take their feedback and I love it. And so then I incorporate or try to incorporate as best as I can, like something they've told me. I'm like, okay, well, that sounds like a really good idea. How can we work that in, type of thing.
I love it. Can you share an example of something that worked that maybe could benefit the rest of us?
There is a Well, it was just a resource that an officer presented to me, and he's familiar with this resource, and he was really advocating for them. And so I called them. I did some research on them first, and then I called them because I wanted to know more about them before I publish anything on my list. I'm not just putting anything on my list. I really want to know more about what they do and how they do it. And so I called this resource, and the lady who answered was just fabulous. She knew her stuff. She said, she's worked with many other law enforcement officers. It's kind of part of like what they do as well as military. They work with the families as well because it's a family unit, because what happens on the job you take home, and what happens at home you take to work.
Yeah, of course.
So it's an all-in-one affair. It's not just one-sided. And she said, I'll meet with officers before they have to go to work or in the middle of the night. If they've been involved in something traumatic and they need to see me, I'll come in at 4:00 in the morning. Mm-hmm. So having that availability and someone who's really willing to, hey, take that extra step and help. I think that speaks volumes.
That's actually one of the things that for our listeners, that's a takeaway is, speaking of first responders, your first point of contact represents that place. And had the woman, when you called, not provided you with a sense of their capacity and compassion and ability, then there would have been a different consideration. So know that, one, if you're in that space, if you're one of the first people that folks encounter, whether they're calling your job or they're coming to the front, or for goodness sakes, if you're coming off the parking lot and you're passing somebody, you might not even be in your office. You are that first line for somebody who may really need a warm, welcome reception from whomever they're dealing with at that time. And even one step further, not just the job you're in, but just for life in general. When I'm thinking about what you may encounter from time to time, just being that person in that particular place in their lives as the first contact from them to their problem or urgency or stress can make a world of difference. Now, it's kind of obvious that first responders have a different set of challenges than everyday folks. What is the greatest distinction, and why? This is why we want to clarify and we want people to understand what is the greatest distinction between what first responders face and in crisis situations than folks that they don't encounter that.
Honestly, I don't know how much difference there really is. Just throwing out just a general example again. Let's say we're called to scene for a robbery. Okay. And it's not like every day everyone gets robbed, right? So for that person right then and there, that was a pretty traumatic experience. That's scary, okay? And it just is. It's one of those things that kind of sticks with you. And depending upon the level of that robbery, it can affect you more than others, right? Like if there was a level of violence in there besides just a street robbery.
Okay, that too.
And not trivializing either end of it, because it's not. Because each one of us, we bring in our own past and our own abilities to cope.
It occurs to us differently,
right?
Each person.
So my ability to cope and my background, of course, is different than everyone else's. So I'm going to handle it differently than you will. It's not saying that either one is right or wrong. We're just handling it a little bit differently.
Yes. And if I'm clinging to your leg in a situation like that, you'll comfort and help me through that.
Exactly.
Oh, it was so terrible. Help me. And you'll say, it's okay, Jade.
So it's really not really not that much different. It just depends upon the person.
How it occurs to the person.
Right.
So you may encounter a traumatic situation that someone handles well based on their particular circumstance. So it is okay.
And sometimes it doesn't hit you right away either. So people have to remember that. Sometimes there's a delayed response, and we all have to remember that there can be a delayed response. And because like right then, the moment you're kind of focused on, okay, I'm okay, he was wearing X, Y, and Z, blah, blah, blah. And you're trying to give this information to the officer who needs to put that out.
Yeah.
And of course, we're trying to obtain that information to be put out. Yeah. So we're asking lots of questions. So you have to remember that you may not feel that level of fear, so to speak, until maybe later. I mean, you felt it initially, but now you know you're safe.
Yeah.
But it may hit you a little bit later. Like once you sit down and everything starts to sink in, you're like, oh my God.
Right. That just happened.
That just happened.
Right. Well, what you just made me aware of here is how many levels that this impacts first responders. One, you've got the situations where people who are committing a crime or causing an incident, the perpetrators, those that are being victimized or affected by said incident, and then anybody around who may witness, as well as who you need to deal with to try to get to what happened, because you're coming after the deals happen. That's a whole lot going on.
There's a lot going on. Absolutely.
And just in you describing some of that, where would you even start?
For us, we start at the beginning. What happened?
What happened? There you go.
Tell us what happened.
For all of us.
That's obviously varying upon occasion. Like, unless there's injuries, then of course you take care of the injuries first, because that takes higher priority. And then as you're doing that, you start to get that other information, et cetera. Mm-hmm. If you're on a more volatile scene or something that requires a little bit more action from, more officers, well, scene security and people's safety, civilian safety,
precedes that too.
Wow. So we have to do that and make sure everyone is safe here first, and then we can start doing our other stuff. But we got to make sure everyone is safe here first before we can do that.
And what's more is that whatever precipitated this situation is probably caused because of an adverse effect of toxic stress or trauma. People who are stressed respond differently, who have had adverse childhood experiences respond differently. And those could be the things that, like you described in your very first example, can then escalate to something greater. Wow. Then let's wrap with providing some guidance or some of the training. Yeah.
I was going to say, one of the things too, is many departments are beginning to recognize that the officers are being impacted by the things that are happening just in the world, in their daily jobs, with family.
Right.
So, as an example, Missouri Highway Patrol has a defense peer team, which I'm a member of. Awesome. So when there is a critical incident involving that officer, we will respond and work with that officer, because, as you say, it could be delayed. They could. Sometimes people think that first responders, because of our training or because of the things that we've seen and done, that we're sort of immune to being impacted and affected.
Yeah.
And so you have, first responders will respond just like anyone else in certain instances. If an officer's just been involved in a shootout, and whether they're physically injured or not, they are mentally injured.
Yeah.
Because when it sets in that I could have just died, or if this just happened, it has an effect. And so they've started a program in which, we will respond and offer initial assistance without being invasive to that officer, but letting them know that they do have someone there that they can talk to who has potentially experienced something of similar nature. And we'll work with them. Now, however, as Sergeant Panzer said, we sort of know if you start seeing certain symptoms of flashbacks, insomnia, different things of that nature, after about 30 days of that continuing, we're going to recommend that you go see a mental health professional.
Now, is that well received? Or, if we're in that place already, then this will be a great takeaway for us. How do we approach sharing, encouraging, recommending that person we care about that's feeling that way, that's a first responder, get the help they need?
I think there's a couple things with that. Is one, we need to destigmatize officers' feelings. They feel just as much as everyone else does. I think we need to destigmatize the whole thing of talking to somebody that, you're just a, you're a cop. You don't really feel, you don't need to talk about this. This is just your job. Well, yes, it's a job, but there's more to it than that. And also just destigmatize the whole fact that seeking a professional help is not a bad thing. And it doesn't mean that anything's wrong. It just sometimes means you just need to work through something, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people can work through things on their own, and some because we all handle it differently. So some people can work through things on their own. Sometimes you need to talk to somebody else. Sometimes that's just a friend. Sometimes it's your partner. Sometimes it's seeking a trained professional who can get you over that hump because you're doing pretty good on your own or we're talking to your friends, but there's that little extra bit that maybe you need to do. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. And I think if we destigmatized all of that, I think we'd be really moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. And that's so very well said, because that's exactly what this initiative is about. That is at the heart of the mission of the Alive and Well STL movement, is that we do take the stigma off of it so that we can go ahead and get to working through them.
Right. And it's okay to ask for help, regardless of who you are or what you do for a living.
That's great.
It is okay to ask for help.
Yeah.
We all have had some kind of circumstance in our life, regardless of how minor or extensive it could be. It impacts us each differently. So we want to ensure that people understand that there is help out there, and it's okay to go ask for that help. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just you may need some additional specific assistance to help you get over that hump.
Right. But get the help.
Right. And also sort of, highlighting, sometimes people don't, because they internalize everything, you may not experience, I have high blood pressure. Well, it's because of my kids, or it's because of the job,
right.
or it's because, and it could be multiple reasons why you have it. However, sometimes we tend, because we're caregivers, we sometimes don't worry about ourselves.
Well,
we worry about everyone else. So how that could be physically impacting us, we may prolong going to the doctor, right? So we're not realizing that high blood pressure is causing a whole nother set of host of problems.
Exactly.
So it's okay that all of these dots do connect, and it's okay to just tell some are comfortable with going to their primary care physician. It's okay to go talk to a counselor. We're not saying everybody has to go see a psychiatrist, because there's different levels. You have counselors, you have therapists, you have psychiatrists. So whatever it is the need is, we want to make sure that you are aware and that the resource is available. And even if you need a holding hand to get there,
right?
That's
a resource.
That is a resource as well.
Absolutely. And those are all strategies that we want to encourage everyone to employ, if not one or multiple ones or all of them. That is exactly what we want to encourage you to do, and it doesn't stop there. Reaching out for help, looking for the signs that someone may need help, but you can get more information and looking for those signs, how to identify whether or not there's a need for someone that you care about or are aware of, but as well as, taking a look at yourself and seeing what those things are. And if you work with Sergeant Panzer, she's got a whole book for you of resources, which is just a fantastic thing to provide. And with your giving resources among children everywhere, that sounds very exciting, and a way as well to provide resources for children who it takes time to develop some of your own tools, but be able to have some assistance in figuring out how to cope as well. Certainly appreciate you every time you come through. Thank you both for being here and helping us understand what it's like for our first responders and what we can do to help. That's the focus of our Alive and Well STL conversation. Sergeant Sally Panzer, St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department Crisis Intervention Team and Officer Wellness Program Coordinator, as well as April Casey with the Giving Resources Among Children Everywhere. Grace, she is the Vice President there. We thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We can better manage the stress in our lives by building supportive relationships and communities. And you can bring Alive and Well STL to your community by becoming an Alive and Well STL ambassador. Ambassadors are a key part of educating our community about how trauma impacts our social, emotional, and health outcomes. If you're interested in being a part of Alive and Well STL and helping continue the conversation, please visit aliveandwellstl.com or email aliveandwellstl@stlrhc.org. We're excited to have you join us with the Alive and Well STL movement. Alive and Well STL is now a community-wide effort focused on reducing the impact of stress and trauma on our health and well-being. The research is clear. Stress and traumatic experiences are making many of us sick, and together are the leading cause of poor health outcomes. Take 5. Visit us at aliveandwellstl.com to find out where you are emotionally. Become an ambassador. Reach out and help build a supportive community. Learn resiliency skills. Get the help you need. Share your stories. Hear others. And learn more about stress and how it affects us. That's aliveandwellstl.com. Alive and Well STL is another positive production of Rare Gem Productions. Thanks for listening.